Imagine walking into a factory in China 10 years from now. You expect to see thousands of workers. Instead, you see machines. Robotic arms moving at incredible speed. Automated vehicles carrying parts across the factory floor. Computer vision systems inspecting products. Humanoid robots learning how to perform tasks once done by human hands. And perhaps the strangest thing of all, there are almost no people. This isn't science fiction. Parts of this future are already here. China has become the world's largest industrial robot market, installing more industrial robots than any other country for years. And the machines are becoming cheaper, smarter, and more capable. But there is a question hiding behind all this technological progress. If China can automate millions of jobs, what happens to the humans who currently do them? And here's where the story gets even more interesting. China isn't simply using robots to replace workers. It is using robots because China has a problem. Its population is aging. Its workforce is changing. Wages have risen dramatically compared with the low-cost manufacturing era of the 1990s and early 2000s. At the same time, China wants to remain the world's factory. So Beijing has increasingly embraced automation. The goal isn't necessarily to eliminate humans. The goal is to make factories produce more with fewer workers. And that creates a much bigger question. If the world's largest manufacturing economy automates at enormous scale, will other countries have to follow? And if they do, could the robot revolution change the global labor market forever? To understand what is happening, we first need to understand just how massive China's manufacturing machine has become. China produces an enormous share of the world's manufactured goods. Electronics, cars, batteries, solar panels, consumer appliances, machinery, industrial equipment. For decades, China's biggest advantage was cheap labor. Millions of workers moved from rural areas into industrial cities. Factories expanded. Exports exploded. Entire manufacturing regions were built around human labor. But China's economic success created a problem. The workers who made China the world's factory are no longer as cheap as they once were. And China is getting older. The United Nations estimates that China's population has entered a period of significant demographic decline. The country's working-age population is shrinking, while the elderly population is growing. That means companies face a strange situation. They need more productivity, while having fewer available workers. Robots suddenly become extremely attractive. A robot doesn't retire, it doesn't need a vacation, it doesn't get tired after an 8-hour shift, and it can potentially work around the clock. For a factory owner, that changes the economics completely. Consider something as simple as welding. A human worker can weld thousands of components over time. But an industrial robot can repeat the same motion with extraordinary consistency. It can work continuously. It doesn't need to breathe toxic fumes. And once the machine is installed, the company doesn't have to pay it a salary. Of course, robots aren't free. They require capital. They need maintenance. They need electricity. They need programmers and technicians. But as technology improves, the economics become increasingly attractive. And China has been investing heavily. According to the International Federation of Robotics, China has become the world's largest market for industrial robots, accounting for a huge share of annual robot installations. China's manufacturing industry has also rapidly increased its robot density, the number of industrial robots relative to manufacturing workers. That number matters, because robot density tells us something important. China isn't simply buying robots. It is redesigning factories around them. And this is where the story becomes much more interesting, because robots are no longer limited to giant robotic arms bolted to factory floors. A new generation is emerging: humanoid robots. Machines designed to walk, see, manipulate objects, and operate in environments originally designed for humans. Why humanoid? Because factories, warehouses, and homes were built for people. Doors have handles. Stairs have steps. Shelves are at human height. Tools are designed for human hands. If you build a robot with a human-like body, theoretically, It can enter environments that already exist without requiring everything to be redesigned. China has become one of the world's major centers for humanoid robot development. Chinese companies are racing to develop machines that can perform industrial tasks. Some are experimenting with robots that can carry boxes. Others are teaching robots to sort objects. Some are testing machines for manufacturing environments. And this creates a fascinating possibility. Imagine a factory where a humanoid robot arrives in the morning. It receives digital instructions. It walks to a workstation. It picks up a component. It assembles it. It carries the finished product to another station. Then it repeats the process. No lunch break. No fatigue. No sick leave. No overtime dispute. If the machine becomes cheap enough, why wouldn't a company use it? But here's the catch. Robots still aren't as capable as humans in many real-world situations. A human can walk into a messy room and immediately understand what needs to be done. A human can pick up an unfamiliar object. A human can use common sense. A human can improvise. Robots struggle with these things. They are extremely good at predictable tasks, but unpredictable environments remain difficult. That's why the most important robot revolution may not happen when robots become perfect. It may happen when robots become cheap enough and good enough. Think about the smartphone. Early smartphones were expensive and limited, but once the technology became good enough and cheap enough, adoption exploded. Robots could follow a similar path, and China has an enormous advantage. It has the factories, it has the supply chains, it has the engineers, it has huge domestic demand, and it has companies willing to experiment at massive scale. That combination could accelerate the robotics revolution. But now comes the uncomfortable question. What happens to the workers? Economists have debated automation for centuries. Every major technological revolution has destroyed some jobs, but it has also created new ones. The agricultural revolution reduced the number of people needed on farms. The Industrial Revolution reduced demand for certain forms of manual labor. Computers eliminated some office tasks. The internet destroyed some industries while creating completely new ones. So perhaps robots will do the same. A factory may need fewer assembly line workers, but it may need more robot technicians, more engineers, more software developers, more maintenance specialists, more logistics workers, more people who design and supervise automated systems. The problem is that the transition isn't always painless. The worker whose job disappears today may not have the skills needed for the job created tomorrow. And this is where automation becomes more than a technology story. It becomes a social story. Imagine a 50-year-old factory worker who has spent 25 years assembling components. A company installs robots. His old job disappears. The company tells him, "Don't worry, new jobs will be created." But what if the new job requires programming? What if he doesn't know how to program? What if training takes 2 years? What happens during those 2 years? This is the hidden problem of automation. Jobs can disappear faster than workers can transition into new ones. And China is not the only country facing this problem. The United States is automating. Japan is automating. South Korea is automating. Germany is automating. India is beginning to automate more rapidly. In other words, China's robot revolution could eventually become everyone's robot revolution. But China has another reason to move quickly. Competition. China wants to remain the world's manufacturing center. But other countries are trying to bring factories home. The United States has invested heavily in domestic semiconductor and advanced manufacturing capacity. Europe is pushing industrial automation. India wants to expand manufacturing. Southeast Asian countries are attracting companies looking for alternatives to China. China therefore faces a strategic challenge. If labor becomes more expensive, manufacturing could move elsewhere. Robots offer a solution. If a Chinese factory can replace thousands of repetitive human tasks with machines, labor costs become less important. This could allow China to remain highly competitive even as wages rise. And that changes the global economy. Imagine two countries. Country A has cheap labor, but little automation. Country B has expensive labor, but extremely advanced robots. If robots become cheap enough, Country B may actually manufacture products more cheaply. This could reverse decades of economic assumptions. For much of modern history, companies moved factories toward cheap workers. The future could be different. Companies may move production toward cheap energy, advanced robots, artificial intelligence, and reliable supply chains. That means the geography of manufacturing could change. But there is another possibility. Robots could actually bring some manufacturing closer to consumers. Why? Because if labor becomes a smaller part of production costs, companies don't need to manufacture everything in countries where wages are extremely low. They could build highly automated factories closer to major markets. A company selling cars in America might eventually find it cheaper to manufacture more cars inside America using robots. A European company might build automated factories in Europe, and China could do the same. This could create a strange world where manufacturing becomes more geographically distributed, but much less dependent on human labor. Now add artificial intelligence. This is where things get truly interesting. Traditional industrial robots were relatively dumb. They followed programmed instructions. If something unexpected happened, they often stopped. AI changes the equation. A robot equipped with cameras, sensors, and advanced AI can potentially recognize objects, understand environments, and adjust its behavior. That means the boundary between robot and AI system begins to disappear. The robot provides the body, AI provides the intelligence, and together they create something much more powerful. Imagine an AI system telling a robot, "Pick up the damaged component." The robot identifies it, moves toward it, grabs it, inspects it, replaces it, then continues working. That's very different from the traditional robotic arm. And if that technology becomes reliable, automation could spread beyond factories. Warehouses, restaurants, construction, agriculture, hospitals, retail, delivery, cleaning, even homes. But again, there is a major obstacle: cost. A robot capable of doing a human job has to be cheaper than employing a human. And that doesn't just mean purchase price. It includes maintenance, energy, software, repairs, training, downtime. Companies will only automate when the economics make sense. That is why the next decade could be so important. If robot prices fall dramatically, while capabilities improve dramatically, adoption could accelerate. And China is in a particularly strong position to make that happen. Because China doesn't simply build robots. It manufactures many of the components robots need: motors, sensors, batteries, electronics, industrial machinery, and increasingly, AI hardware. This creates a powerful feedback loop. China makes robots. Robots make factories more productive. Those factories make robot components cheaper. Cheaper components make robots cheaper. Cheaper robots create more demand. More demand creates more investment. More investment improves the technology. And the cycle continues. But what happens if this cycle becomes too successful? What if companies discover that one robot can replace 5 workers, then 10, then 50? That's when the conversation changes. It stops being about productivity. It becomes about employment. And this is where economists disagree. Some believe automation will ultimately create more wealth and new categories of jobs. Others warn that AI and robotics could automate tasks faster than new jobs are created. The truth may be somewhere between the two. Robots probably won't eliminate human work completely, but they may change what human work looks like. The most vulnerable jobs are likely to be those involving repetitive, predictable physical or cognitive tasks. The safest jobs may involve creativity, complex decision-making, human relationships, leadership, and unpredictable environments. But even that distinction is becoming less certain. AI can already write. It can translate. It can analyze images. It can generate software. And robots can increasingly manipulate physical objects. So the future isn't simply humans versus machines. It may be humans working with machines. The worker of the future may not compete against a robot. He may supervise 10 or 50 or perhaps hundreds. One technician could eventually manage an entire automated production system. That sounds like progress, but it also means one worker could be responsible for an enormous amount of production. Productivity could rise dramatically. And that raises another question. Who receives the benefits? If robots make companies much more productive, shareholders may become richer. Consumers may get cheaper products. Companies may become more competitive. But displaced workers may lose income. The technology itself doesn't decide how the benefits are distributed. Governments and societies do. That is why China's robot revolution is not only about machines. It is also about economic policy, education, worker retraining, social safety nets, wages, and the future relationship between humans and technology. There is an even bigger question. What happens if robots become capable of doing not just one job, but thousands of different jobs? At that point, the economic value of human labor could begin changing fundamentally. Perhaps humans will work fewer hours. Perhaps productivity will create greater prosperity. Perhaps new industries we cannot imagine today will appear. Or perhaps inequality will increase dramatically. Nobody knows. But China is betting heavily that automation will make its economy stronger. And that bet is already changing factories. The image of the Chinese factory worker surrounded by endless rows of workers may belong to the past. The factory of the future could look very different. Rows of machines, sensors everywhere, AI systems monitoring production, autonomous vehicles moving materials, robotic arms assembling products, humanoid machines performing tasks designed for human bodies, and a small number of humans watching over the entire system. That future may sound frightening, but remember something important. The purpose of technology has never been simply to destroy jobs. It is to make certain forms of human labor unnecessary. That has happened throughout history. The question is what society does next. When machines take over difficult work, humans have a choice. We can use the productivity to create better lives, or we can allow the benefits to flow mainly toward those who own the machines. That is the real battle. Not humans versus robots, but who controls the robots and who benefits from them. China's robotics revolution is therefore much bigger than China. If China succeeds in building highly automated factories capable of producing everything from cars to electronics with fewer workers, other countries will have to respond. Companies will face pressure to automate. Workers will need new skills. Governments will have to rethink education. And millions of people may eventually have to ask themselves a question that once sounded like science fiction. If a machine can do my job better, faster and cheaper, what is my job worth? Perhaps the most surprising part is that the robot revolution may not arrive with a dramatic moment. There may be no single day when robots take our jobs. Instead, it may happen quietly. One factory replaces 100 workers. Another replaces 500. A warehouse becomes automated. A delivery center uses autonomous machines. A restaurant introduces robotic systems. A company stops hiring for certain positions. Another company requires workers to supervise AI. One job disappears, another changes, a new one appears, and slowly, almost invisibly, the labor market changes. That's how technological revolutions often happen, not all at once, but one decision at a time. So are China's robots really coming for our jobs? In some industries, they already are. But the bigger question isn't whether robots will replace workers. They almost certainly will replace some tasks. The real question is whether humans can adapt quickly enough to the new economy those robots create. Because the future may not belong to the country with the cheapest workers. It may belong to the country with the smartest machines, the cheapest robots, the best AI, and the workers who know how to use them. And China is betting that it can become all four. The robot revolution has already begun. The only question is how far it will go. And when the machines finally become capable of doing most of the work we once believed only humans could do, we may discover that the biggest challenge was never teaching robots how to work. It was deciding what humans should do next. So, the rise of robots in China is not simply a story about machines replacing workers. It is a story about how quickly the world of work is changing. China is investing heavily in robotics and artificial intelligence to overcome rising labor costs, an aging population, and growing global competition. For businesses, robots promise greater productivity and lower costs. For workers, however, they create uncertainty. Some jobs will disappear, while new jobs will emerge. The real challenge will be whether people can learn new skills quickly enough to keep pace with technology. And perhaps the biggest question is not whether robots will take our jobs. It is who will benefit when machines become incredibly productive. If technology creates greater prosperity, humans could work less and live better. But if its benefits remain concentrated among those who own the machines, inequality could grow. China may be building the robots, but the consequences will reach the entire world. The future of work has already begun,